The 2024 Defense Authorization Bill caused a sigh of relief in parts of the Pentagon. Why? Congress decided not to impose new rules and requirements for using Other Transaction Authority, OTA, an increasingly popular way to streamline acquisition of new technologies. And anyhow, DoD recently updated OTA guidance on its own. For more, Federal News Network's Jason Miller spoke to the Director for Contract Policy in the Office of Defense Pricing and Contracting, Mary Kathryn Robinson.
For the years between FY16 and FY22, we had about 15,000 total OT actions, and that includes mods and OT awards for about $70 billion in spend. And these are the years that we specifically saw the huge growth in. So like in 2016, we had about 333 actions for $1.3 billion. In FY20, we really peaked because of COVID, right? We used a lot of OTs for COVID. We did about 3,200 actions for $16 billion. And then we've come down a little bit in our dollar spend, but right now in FY22, our last year of full data, we had about 4,400 actions for about $10.7 billion. And right now we're thinking that, again, I don't have the final FY23 numbers, but I think that FY23 is going to come in around that. So again, a handful of OTs 15 years ago. So this is a huge growth. I think people are seeing the benefits of the OTs. I think they're seeing the benefit of using non-traditional defense contractors. And I think that's where the growth is coming from.
Appreciate the data. I think it's really helpful to understand the growth and the fact that, yes, during COVID, OTs played a big role in a lot of the efforts to get vaccines and understanding what's happening. Do you break down where those actions go? There's so many in technology, so many in weapons, or so many in different pieces and parts that DoD can touch? I
have a couple numbers in regards to that, I think, but I know that about 80% is R&D, goes to research and development. And then we have a couple towards weapons and ammunition, electronic and communication equipment, or professional services. But I don't have a breakdown of the specific R&D ones. I'm sorry.
You see a lot of the awards and people will say, oh, well, it goes to the usual suspects, right? Pick your big defense contractor or big professional services contractor. First of all, what do you say about that? Because I think that's a concern about OTs. And second, do you have data or anything that says actually we see those press releases because those companies are big and they put the press releases out, but we just don't see the small companies who probably don't have a big press machine to push them out. What data do you have about this usual suspects concern?
The requirement is for a non-traditional defense contractor to be part of the team in a significant way, right? So in FY22, 92% of our OTs were awarded to those OT contractors or performers that had a non-traditional defense contractor performer on there doing something in a significant way. So what is significant, right? So the agreements officer is actually held to try to figure that out and to make that determination and make that independent judgment. So again, significant is not necessarily dollars. Significant could be specific to a key technology or a specific cost reduction. Some of the things that we look at is, again, does the NDC supply a new key technology, product, or process? Do they have a novel application or approach to the technology? Do they have a material increase in the performance efficiency of a key technology? Do they result in a material reduction in cost and schedule of a project? Or do they provide a material increase in the performance of the prototype project? So again, that does not necessarily mean that they're the prime contractor on something, but it does mean that they're doing some heavy lifting on the actual project itself. So again, agreements officers are held to that. They have to determine and they're required to validate and document that status. And again, we were able to make that determination on 92% of the projects that we do. So even if it's going to Lockheed Martin, that does not mean that we don't have NDCs out there.
DoD released an updated OTA guide earlier this summer, and let's start there. What does the guide look like? Why did you release it? What was the impetus for the update? And then we can get into what's in the guide itself.
Because of this growth and because of everything that these OTs can do for us, we've worked to update that OT guide. And we want to be able to help this DoD acquisition community, as well as our contractors, our partners in industry, academia, and then also nonprofits, to help define what an OT is and help them create the best OTs that they can create. So in this guide, what did we do? We did a couple things that we had to do, right? We made those updates based on changes in statute and regulation and recommendations that we received from the DoD and from the Government Accountability Office. But then we also added administrative guidance and best practices for things like reporting, funding, participation and validation of those NDCs, those non-traditional defense contractors, protest procedures, agreements officer warranting and training, and then other considerations for folks to take into account as they move forward with their OTs.
You mentioned some of the changes that you worked in around statute and regulation and recommendations. Let's start there. Maybe highlight a few, one or two of them that really stood out to you from the sense of, hey, this was a big change from the last time we put the guide out, which I think, if you correct me if I'm wrong, was maybe 2018, 2019 timeframe?
That sounds about right. So one of the things that we did, and this is something that came out in the FY23 NDAA, was a reference in regards to follow-on production OTs, right? So the understanding before was that you had to reference in your prototype OT that you were possibly going to do a follow-on production OT out of that. And that was the only way that you could have your sole source follow-on. You had to reference it in the solicitation for the prototype. Well, something in the FY23 NDAA actually took that requirement out and said, well, you don't have to explicitly state it. You can just move towards a production OT at the end. So that's one of the updates that we made. It is still a best practice, though, to put that in your OT to say, hey, in your solicitation, we are planning on doing a production OT, but it is no longer required.
If we could just kind of pull the string on that for a second as well, talk a little bit about why that's an important change. Would that slow down or would that encumber DoD from kind of moving, hey, we had this successful prototype, let's broaden this? Or was it just something around industry? They wanted more opportunity to bid or to apply for or to get on board with the OT?
Yeah, I think there was some confusion on when we were doing OTs on the prototype side on where we were going to go with that and how we can push forward and how that competition would work and ensure that we could have a kind of, like you said, a quick turn to production. So this way we're able to again, make that determination as long as we can show that there's been a success at that prototype OT based on the criteria that we've set for success on that prototype, we can move straight to a follow-on non-competitive effort. And that could be either a FAR-based or another OT for production. So this is really kind of a clarification and to ensure, again, that people have a great understanding of what could come out of that prototype OT.
One of the other interesting bits and pieces about the OT guide is the myth busting. And there's, I think, 12 myths in all. Talk a little bit about some of those myths, maybe the ones that were most prevalent or the ones that stood out to you. And then let's talk about how you are busting them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And especially I recommend everybody go check out Appendix D of the OT guide, because there are these myths here that we all, I would say even some of us here have internalized, right? And then how do we tell people that it's different? So one of the biggest one, I think, is in regards to OTs not needing to be competitive, right? That's a huge one. And that's what we continually hear, that we're not doing, you don't not need competition for OTs. Okay, well, you actually do. So as we do not necessarily have to follow the Competition and Contracting Act for an OT, but we are supposed to be looking to get competition to the maximum extent practicable. And we want competition, right? Just like in a FAR-based contract, competition actually helps us. It will lower prices, it will get us high-quality products, and then it'll also get us innovative solutions. And then the other one, like we were just talking about, the other benefit of a competitive prototype OT is that you can go to a non-competitive follow-on production award out of that. So number one, we absolutely want competition, and that's something that I hope that we've dispelled in this document.
Mary Kathryn Robinson, Director for Contract Policy in the Office of Defense Pricing and Contracting. That's part of the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Acquisition. She was speaking there with Federal News Network's Jason Miller. Check out Jason's story at federalnewsnetwork.com.